welcome back to another Exchange podcast. And we are back as promised. I want to go ahead and say it. There will not be one next week. It's Memorial Day, and we're both going to be out of town on that weekend. A lot of stuff just going on. It is Memorial Day, right?
I'd have to look at it.
Well, it's Memorial Day. We're so patriotic around here. It is Memorial Day, and we're not going to be here for that. But I would say if you've got time and you want to, go back and go through the library. They're all on YouTube. They're on Facebook. They're on what is now X, formerly known as Twitter. The artist formerly known as Twitter. But anyway, go back, listen to some of them. But thank you again for being here this week. Again, as always, we welcome questions. Please listen. If you've got questions, fire them in. If you've got comments, fire them in. Again, just keep them PG and discussion friendly. I think everything can be done mannerly and in order.
Absolutely. Leave us some comments. Let us know what you like, don't like. Any interesting topics you want to discuss. Let us know. We'll definitely consider it.
Absolutely. And so kind of wanting to discuss some stuff that came up earlier this week. Title of this is Mask or Masquerade. We all remember, a few years ago, what was it, 4 years ago, when we all had to wear a mask to go out in the public. And the thing is that even then I remembered you sent me something, and I heard about it on radio, and then you sent me something. Is it North Carolina or South Carolina?
North Carolina.
North Carolina is trying to get their the state Congress, the state House.
Trying to pass a law banning the wearing of masks in public.
Which I'm 100%. See, for some reason I had already thought that was a law. But I'm going to. This is something that I wanted. I remember when I was living in Tennessee when this was being discussed, and the headline on this is from the Rutherford County, Tennessee Historical Society. And I was living in the state, and I actually lived in the county that bordered Rutherford County. And this is actually Murfreesboro. And Greg Tucker, Daily News Journal. This was written July 26, 2015, and the heading is Forrest Halted Abuses, Disbanded Ku Klux Klan. Now, with that, you probably already know. Everyone knows who I'm talking about. Nathan Bedford Forrest. And if you drive down I-65 going towards Nashville, you will see this big, if it's still there, I think it is, because it's owned by private property. It's a big statue of Nathan Bedford Forrest. And he's on his horse. He was known as the Wizard of the Saddle in the Civil War. As a matter of fact, there are letters that were found from the Confederate President Davis and the former General Robert E. Lee. And if you know anything about Civil War history, what you know is that after General Andrew Jackson was killed, the Confederacy never had another general who was over their cavalry. And the main problem with the Confederacy is that they could not agree on how to fight that war. And there are historical evidences that the plans that General Sherman got, that he has now looked down upon because of the way he went through Georgia, and people want to argue that was the only way to win the Civil War. Some people say no. It was very brutal what he did.
Well, that's like the argument that dropping the atomic bombs on Japan was necessary.
Yeah.
It's very similar, scorched earth.
Scorched earth, yeah. But it's very believable that he got those plans off of the dead corpse of Andrew Jackson. That was Jackson's initial idea. You can find writings where Robert E. Lee, Davis, and Jackson all disagreed on how to fight that war. As any general Robert E. Lee knew that an offensive assault was necessary, but he did not agree with Andrew Jackson's scorched earth policy.
Yeah, well, if you look at Robert E. Lee, he was trained at West Point.
Mm-hmm.
He was one of the most highly regarded
Yes.
generals.
Mm-hmm.
Little side note to history there. Robert E. Lee never owned a slave.
Right.
Ulysses.
I just had this discussion with someone this week.
Actually did.
Yeah.
Robert E. Lee. So during the Civil War, up until the conclusion of the Civil War, your state was the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
Robert E. Lee was quoted as saying, "As Virginia goes, as do I."
Right.
You know, if Virginia votes to secede, then I will secede. If they don't, then so he could have very well fought
Right.
for the Union as opposed to the Confederacy.
Yeah.
But he was loyal to his state.
Well, yeah. And that's really the only way that Ulysses Grant got the job, was because he turned it down.
Yeah.
And
By
by default, and Grant had to get rid of all of his slaves because it was against the policy of the Lincoln administration.
Yeah. Well, so there's also, now I don't know if there's any historical basis for it, but I had heard at one point when Lee surrendered at Appomattox, when they went to surrender, Ulysses S. Grant asked if he knew who he was, and he said he did not. And that crushed him. Now, whether there's any validity to that or it was just a post-Civil War kind of jab
At Grant.
I'm not sure. But, you know, Lee was regarded very highly.
Well, I do know that there is historical basis for this, that Lee's cabinet, Lee's, for lack of better, his staff told him, we don't have to surrender. We could keep this war going on for another 10 years. Because, see, that was actually, and that was what I was driving at, was Davis's idea of fighting the war, was that the South, number one, had better shooters. I mean, those guys were marksmen, and they had much more vast land. So to attack and just run this all-out attack on the South was going to be extremely stupid. That's the reason why that Sherman picked Georgia as opposed to all of the South. Because if you go back to the first Battle of Bull Run, the Confederacy handily won that battle. No one can figure out why they didn't just go on in and take the capital. That was because Davis did not want to fight that style of war. And so he chose not to, and it cost him. I mean, the South actually should have won. Thank God they didn't. But what I'm saying is they should have won. They could have won that war. Robert E. Lee was probably the one, if he would have been left up to being able to call the shots, then
they would have stood a much better.
They would have stood a much better chance.
It's the same thing with World War II. If Hitler had allowed his generals to actually run the war instead of trying to run it himself, Germany would have stood a much better chance of winning the war. The thing is, when you have politicians or people who are not trained in military tactics making the decisions, inevitably it does not play well for your forces.
No. And kind of going into why I brought all this up to begin with was that you can read this, and that's the reason why I'm going to try to post this in the. I don't know if YouTube will let us get away since we're using the word Ku Klux Klan forced. That's kind of swearing on their. You can use any other word except for those, right? But I might try to post this if I can. But in it says Forrest was post-war activist for Black civil rights. And there's a link there that you can click. And I have actually read the last public speech that he gave, and it's very much so. That is true. And in 2015, July 12th, 2015, in the Murfreesboro Daily News Journal, they're kind of going through all of this stuff, and they're talking about Forrest, and they're kind of giving the purpose of why the Klan claimed, and maybe they were in their early days, why they formed, and it was to keep the carpetbaggers and the scallywags that were coming down from the north, and they were just buying up land, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. We don't call them that anymore. We have a different name. We now call them BlackRock and J.P. Morgan, but they're kind of the same, one and the same. And but the Klan kind of came about because of that. And so there's been all these rumors that Forrest started the Klan. He did not. I've been by the building. It's in Pulaski, Tennessee. If you go by the building, it's not much bigger, and you can't see it. It's not much bigger than the studio we're in right now. It's probably, if you took the petition wall out and you go to the next room over either way, that was about the size of the building where the Klan started. And there was a plaque that was on there that they have now turned around and reversed it, and you can't even read it, which I'm not against. You can't forget history, but I'm not against not making that this public display.
A pilgrimage site.
Right. But what's even more funny, and I'll let you get to your point. What's even more ironic is it's a black college that sits next door to where the building is.
Yeah, I mean, it's history should be there to be preserved, because those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. But there comes a fine line of leaving up things that could memorialize things that are detrimental to society. But you certainly don't want to forget those events. It's important to remember where we've come from to understand where we are now.
Well, and you and I have talked about this before, how that in the United States, it was never the purpose of having a professional military. That came about and Eisenhower warned the American people against the military-industrial complex. And it says here in this article, it says, like most of the surviving Confederate soldiers, Forrest followed the advice he gave to his men at the surrender and returned to his home in Memphis, where he resumed farming and headed a railroad venture. There is no record of his ever being in Pulaski. What that's saying is that he was not there at the founding. He was not the founder of the KKK, and he was not there at the founding of it. Also, it says that Forrest's first involvement with the Ku Klux fraternity appears to have been in 1867, when a group of meeting in Nashville elected Forrest to be their leader. Research by Michael Bradley, Professor Emeritus, Motlow State Community College, indicates that Forrest was not in Nashville when the meeting occurred, so he wasn't there. And there is no record of Forrest's participation in any Ku Klux activity prior to March 1869. Forrest did comment on the supposed size of the Klan during an interview by Northern newspaper reporter in 1868. His comments evidenced a lack of accurate information. Acting in his official Ku Klux capacity in 1869, Forrest issued his first and only order. Now, this is the only order he ever made as Grand Wizard of the Klan. This is generally referred to in Klan histories as the order to disband. Thanks to Ku Klux founder John C. Lester, the text of that order has been preserved. And I'm going to read that. It says, Lester served as captain in the 3rd Tennessee Infantry in 1865 through 66. He was a practicing attorney in Pulaski and an official in the Methodist Church. In 1884, while serving in Tennessee legislature, Lester and a co-author wrote and published Ku Klux Klan, Its Origin, Growth, and Disbandment. The pamphlet, privately printed in Nashville, identified and referenced several original documents, including the first and second prescript and Forrest order. One tenet of the original Ku Klux organization was to destroy all communications. Lester, apparently a conscientious lawyer, retained his file. The first page of Forrest orders reads as follows. General order. Number 1, whereas the order of the KKK is in some localities being perverted and its original honorable and patriotic purpose, and whereas such a perversion of the order is in some instances defeating the very objects of its origin, and is becoming injurious instead of subservient to the public peace and safety for which it was intended, and in some cases is being used for personal benefit, private purposes, and to satiate private revenge by means of its mass features. Sounds really familiar to Black Lives Matter.
And Antifa, any of these other organizations. So you can go throughout history and look at a multitude of organizations that may have had a founding that if you read the reason for creation would not be looked down upon.
Mm-hmm.
However, through that's why you have to be so careful when you create something that it doesn't get out of control and that you keep an eye and a hand on it, because you'll have people run away with it and you'll be so far from where you started.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at, I mean, we're talking about recent history or more recent, you know, we can go back to World War II. After World War One, Germany was devastated.
That's
you
right.
had to have a wheelbarrow, and people don't realize you had to have a wheelbarrow full of money to buy a loaf of bread.
Mm-hmm.
You don't understand the level of destitution and hunger, which gave rise to the National Socialist, which would later become the Nazi Party.
Right.
When Hitler took power, all he wanted to do originally is return Germany to its place in the world,
Mm-hmm.
because they had been they weren't just defeated in World War One, they were essentially, for lack of a better term, they'd been kind of castrated.
Well, Woodrow Wilson's cabinet, his advisors told him, you better go into Germany and do something about this, because if you don't, someone's going to.
Yes, and so if they had just left it at rebuilding, because they put 10,000 men to work rebuilding the roads. If they had just stopped short of invading most of Europe and creating a world war, he would have been, I mean, he was lauded as one of the greatest men of the time.
If he had not have been so crazy as he was, and he was crazy as a loon.
Well, his doctor really helped with that. The concoction of amphetamine and everything else he was given.
Yeah. He actually, if he would not have been a murderer and just a sociopath and a psychopath as he was, I want everybody to understand that. The man was evil. But had he not been, with the ideas that he did have, as far as you said, trying to restore Germany back in its order, he could have went down as very much that of a George Washington-esque person.
Creation of the Autobahn.
Yeah.
So that people could freely travel on good roads, which are still regarded as some of the best in the world. The creation of Volkswagen, the people's car, so that everyone, even if you were poor, could afford transportation. I mean, they're all great ideas. It just got perverse.
Yeah.
And transformed into something that no one saw coming. Because if you look up until the late 1930s, he was being lauded in a lot of places and was really popular.
Mm-hmm.
You can think of, like I said, there's many examples throughout history of something starting with if you took away all of the hatred and all of the stuff that came later and all the blame that came from Germany's destitution, and you just simply looked at, they planted trees, they built highways, they put people to work. It sounds great up until the point where you're going to exterminate a whole race of people.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden it takes a whole different malevolent turn.
Rears its ugly head.
Yeah.
But on the front end, if you were simply wanting to rebuild your country and put people to work and end hunger, they'll sound great. It sounds good. But you want to prevent people from coming in and ravaging your land after you just lost a war?
Yeah.
On the front end, doesn't sound bad. It's what happens afterwards.
Right. Well, and that's why that the left keep trying to talk about this whole thing with Donald Trump, that make America great again. And you're going, no. It's not even the same thing. It's not even the same thing. And there have been other presidents such as Bill Clinton who has used that term. Why? Because if you don't have a strong America, everyone will come in and take advantage.
We, as a country, prop up a majority of the world.
Yes.
When trouble comes knocking, who did they turn to? They turn to the United States. And if we are not capable of helping them, then who will? The other thing that people need to realize is that if we are not, I'm all about America first. Okay, you need to take care of your own home before you take care of someone else.
Yeah.
put your own oxygen mask on before you put the oxygen mask on
Right.
the people around you. However, if we don't step in, what are the other alternatives? And right now, it's going to be Russia, China.
Yeah.
Do you really want those influences in the world? And I don't know if we're going to segue into this or not, but Putin just went to China and met with Xi to reinforce their collaboration.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, we're definitely.
We're entering a dangerous. We're on. I keep saying this, but it's so true. We're on the edge of a precipice.
Right.
Okay, if we don't go in and help some of these countries, and we leave it to the alternative.
Yeah.
I mean, it's essential. We're fighting another Cold War.
We are, and that's kind of, and I want to just read just a little bit more, because he goes on and he says, and whereas such a perversion of the order is in some instances defeating the very objects of its origin, and is becoming injurious instead of subservient to the public peace and public safety for which it was intended, and in some cases is being used for personal benefit and private purposes, and that was the part, because what was that last year when the president of BLM got caught with her hand in the cookie jar because she was using millions of dollars to buy a mansion.
No, yeah, buy mansions in really upscale, predominantly white areas.
Yeah,
the exact antithesis
of what she claimed to be.
Yes.
And that's exactly what was going on here. And so we're not dealing with anything new. I mean, they were dealing with it back then. And it says, and whereas their masked features offers an opportunity to bad men outside the order to depredate and outrage the people in our name. And whereas a few disobedient and bad men have gotten into the order through imprudence and otherwise, and whose conduct under mask is a disgrace to the good name and honorable reputation of the order, it is therefore ordered and decreed that the masks and costumes of this order be entirely abolished and destroyed, and every den leader shall assemble the men of his den and require them to destroy in his presence every article of mask and costume, and at the same time shall destroy his own. The order goes on to enumerate prohibited activities, including all demonstrations. Forrest apparently recognized that anonymity fostered abuse and that the activity had gone beyond the original fraternal and social intent. So he goes on to talk about how that the order had been disbanded, and by 1869 it no longer existed. But then in 1914, Stone Mountain, there was a whole the Klan wasn't even the same one that they try to say that he was a part of.
No, there was a resurgence, which I think reached its peak in the 1920s.
Yeah, they were, and you know what brought that down? It was the governor of again, everybody wants to blame the Republicans for being racist. What it was the governor of Indiana, and he actually was from the South, and he had originally been a Democrat. And because at that time, only Democrats carried the South, which is why we kind of had the Klan, right? And so he goes to Indiana and he runs for governor, but he runs on the Republican ticket because he was not going to get elected. So the Klan had grown to, it was right at 1 million members. Well, what he does, he assaults this black woman on a train, stabs her, I don't know how many times, and then throws her body off the train. She survived. Now, I think she died of her wounds eventually, but not before she was able to identify the governor of Indiana as the assaulter, as the assailant, and what he had done. So it created this storm, and the Republicans put him out. And when that happened, again, a lot of people were like, I'm not tying my name to this organization, because the organization stood behind it. Now, am I singing the praises of the Klan? No, by no means. That's a bunch of good old boys that are dumb as rocks.
Full of vitriol hatred.
Yes, visual, and yes, very much so.
The same thing could be said about the federal government.
Yeah.
If you look at how it's grown and its intended purpose, it's no different than these organizations.
Yeah.
If you look at Social Security and these other things that you're paying into, it's become something that it was not intended
That's right.
to be. Like I said, history is littered with examples. But something going back to ordering them to destroy their mask and their robes and their costumes. There's people will act a lot different when there's no anonymity, when they can't hide behind something. That's why people are real bold online, and then when you see them face to face, they're humbled really quickly because they realize they can't quite back up what they say.
Well, and that works in a lot of stuff, And again, not to compare the band Kiss to the KKK by any means. I'm not doing that. But I want to bring this because I remember an interview where Gene Simmons said that what made them stay with the makeup was that they had just done it, I think, kind of as a rib initially. He said, he said, we noticed that we played with more confidence. And so then the makeup, and of course, as we know, the rest is history, or history, as they like to say. You're right. Anonymity brings out a certain, that's the reason why you got all these tough talkers online. Anonymity brings out a certain amount of gutsiness that normally wouldn't be there. I've talked to women who have tried the whole online dating, and they're like, man, these guys are just completely forward. They're like, something's changed. I said, well, here's what's changed. They're behind a screen. They would never go to, somewhere to meet a woman and speak like that because they know, number one, they would get slapped, and number two, they probably would get charged with assault.
Well, so that's why, many months ago we had talked about dating, and granted, I've been married for a long time, but if I wasn't and I was going into the dating pool, I would prefer to not do it online. Like, I want to actually meet someone face to face. People are much different when you're around them than they are through a computer screen. And in fact, nowadays, with catfishing and everything, you don't actually know who you're talking to.
Right.
It may not even be, let's say you think you're talking to a woman, it may be a man. You have no idea. The level of anonymity can sometimes be detrimental to your actual interaction.
So go ahead and so, yeah, I want to kind of segue into that because Putin and Xi vowed to deepen no limits partnership in Russia advances in Ukraine. That kind of pairs with what I was saying earlier about the carpetbaggers and the scallywags now are BlackRock and JP Morgan. And I say that because it says that they are backing a $15 billion investor fund to rebuild Ukraine. Now, we've seen how that works here, right? They're coming in to large cities and they're just buying up blocks of land, and people can't pay the taxes, they can't pay the rent, and they're running people out is what they're doing.
They're buying up as much real estate as they possibly can.
Yes. And it's creating an extreme hardship on small companies, private investors. Because these guys got endless amounts of money behind them. And the president of BlackRock, I can't think of his name right offhand, but he said that, once people realize the endless amount of AI and what it's going to be able to do. If you didn't know any better, all of this sounds like a script out of a Terminator movie. Everything's going to machines, and we're just kind of removing the human factor as much as possible.
So, one thing that it's a cautionary tale, and only time will tell how it actually turns out. But when you have people like Elon Musk and other billionaires who, Musk is an innovator. He creates things. He's an inventor. Obviously, very intelligent. Is saying AI, we need to throttle it back. Like we're going too far forward.
Yeah.
When people like that start issuing a warning, you should probably listen.
Yeah.
And they're now trying to create AI that can trick humans. Like, you won't even know if you're interacting with a computer or a person. There's a multitude of shows and and stories about what happens if AI decides that, like let's say you programmed it to do what's best for humanity, and what if it decides wiping out humanity is the best thing? You're opening Pandora's box. The other thing is, I have read that there are several AI programs that started to learn or get outside of the boundaries that they set for it, and they've had to terminate them. You can go and Google those. They're legit news articles. But if that's the case, we're creating something that once it gets out onto the internet, there's no getting it back. And what happens, everything's connected to the internet. Your cell phone, your laptop, your refrigerators now. Everything is getting Wi-Fi connectivity, your thermostat, your this or that. How far? It's not really outside the realm of possibility that your entire house goes haywire because everything's connected to the internet, and the AI decide, or somebody gets a hold of the AI and decides they're going to wreak havoc.
Well, I think, all this does play into biblical prophecy. And, when you look at what Xi Jinping and Putin are doing, I go back to the 2012 election or 2008 election rather. No, 2012, when Obama was running against Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney came out strong, man, on that first debate. He tore Obama up, and then on the second debate, he just slid off. Mitt Romney lost. They all, he got really upset, and he became an enemy, if you will, of Donald Trump, because Donald Trump said, which was true. He said it was Mitt Romney's election to lose, and he lost it. And I'll never forget. And I think it was the second, but maybe the third debate. He turns to Romney and he says, Russia called and they want their Cold War back, and all, people just went crazy. The people that are leading the Democrat Party, that are sitting in the White House, but all over, are constantly on the wrong side of these issues, economically and geopolitically. And I don't think that it is by accident. I think it's by design that they are on these wrong side of the issues like this. And you look at how all of this has played out in the last 12 to 14 years. Trump had China on the ropes, and Russia has not been a global player since the Cold War. But now they're really starting to make this push into Russia. And this whole thing with J.P. Morgan and BlackRock, going in there and buying up all this land. China and Russia are not global players. They're in it for China and Russia. They're there to make Russia great again. They're there to make China great again.
Well, that's why the Chinese have gotten so aggressive in the South China Sea, making artificial islands. They're chomping at the bit to take Taiwan. Russia has really renewed their efforts in Ukraine, and now they're attacking Kharkiv in the north. We're at a dangerous crossroads. So one of the compliments I can give to Trump is Trump's set foot in North Korea. He sat Putin down and said, "This is going to stop."
Yeah.
He met with Xi and all these other world leaders and said, "This will not happen." What did he tell Iran?
Yeah.
If you keep it up, we'll bomb you back to the Stone Age.
Yeah.
And guess what? It stopped.
Yeah.
The thing is, the Russians, if we go back to Ronald Reagan, they believed that he was a crazy cowboy, and they just thought he might just actually do it.
That's it.
That's the thing. So you need a president who is confident, who knows the capabilities of his people, who knows the capabilities of his country, to look, if you do this, this is what will happen. We will rain down, you will literally, as what did Xerxes tell King Leonidas, we'll have arrows so plentiful it'll black out the sky. Well, then we'll fight in the shade.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Yeah.
you know, we will rain down terror on you like you've never known. And they believed it. And it's quite apparent because how many wars were going on? How many wars were we involved in during his presidency? It was a very limited. We had no major global conflict. And then now the world is in a state of turmoil because we have a weak leader. And the world knows it.
Well, I go to churches. I go to churches and I speak to churches, around, different parts of the country. And I remember years ago, I think it was right after, I'm trying to think. I want to say it was right after, it was either, no, it was right after we had attacked Iraq. They had not found Saddam Hussein yet. I don't believe, maybe they had, but I don't think so. And I was ministering at this church in St. Louis, Missouri. And I think I was in my early mid 20s, 23, 24, somewhere around there. So this has been a little over 20 years ago. And driving down the road with the pastor who at that, he's passed away now. He was considerably older. I think he was in his 70s then. And this guy knew biblical prophecy. He could quote it chapter and verse without even looking at the Bible. And I'm not saying that. We hear that like, well, they know the Bible so well, they can quote it chapter and verse. No, this guy could. And he was actually driving because he had a Bible there, and he's like, pick up and read such and such a chapter, such and such a verse. And I remember it was out of the book of Revelation, so I read it. He goes, now flip over to Daniel, and it gives me the chapter and verse. I read it. And then he gives me another one out of Ezekiel, I believe. And so I read it. He goes, okay. He said, what all those are, they're tied in. And he said, I want you to, he said, mark my words down. He said, this is what's going on. He said, everyone thinks that we are doing this patriotic duty by invading Iraq and by killing Saddam Hussein. He said, but what we're actually doing is we're fulfilling those verses. He said, because you got to remember that America is not mentioned in Bible prophecy. He said, what that means is that America is going to be beat down politically and militarily that we're not going to be able to step up and do what we've been able to do in the world. And that's where we are. We are at a place where, they're trying to decide if we're going to give money to Ukraine or we're going to give money to Israel, which has been our ally for years. Ukraine is just building a military, really a 21st century military off of American money.
So I think part of the reason that they push, and I've said it before and I'll say it yet again, part of the reason they push Ukraine so hard is that's essentially a money laundering location for
That's
the
right.
US. If you look at why was Hunter Biden sitting on the board of executives for a Ukrainian energy company, doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's because there's lots and lots of money flowing through
That's
there,
right.
Which is part of the reason that Putin felt threatened.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's not kid ourselves. There is a reason he went after Ukraine.
Yeah.
But I think that's why they're so adamant about sending resources and money. We're talking $61 billion
to Ukraine.
And the insane thing is, I remember when they wanted to build the border wall.
Yeah.
They said $5 billion. That's too much money.
Yeah.
But we're sending 12 times that much to a foreign country.
Yeah.
Halfway around the world. Our priorities are so jacked up. Do I want to see Ukraine fall? No. Do I want the world there to end? Yes. I don't want to see anyone suffer and die, especially for the reasons that it's being conducted.
But like any other war we fought by proxy, I'm just waiting for when Ukraine turns on the United States.
Yeah. Well, it's inevitably going to happen. Or if we fall through on something, that they'll hate us forever.
Yeah.
we've done this time and time and time again. But you know, like with Israel, now we want to. Well, like I said, I think that's more virtue signaling. They want to withhold weapons and munitions for Israel because there may or may not have been. I love the headlines that there were likely violations, but we haven't actually determined it yet. You know, but they're just using that as an excuse to not send the stuff over there because we don't have as much to gain
Yeah.
from protecting Israel. If you look at it monetarily, they're not protecting their monetary interest. Instead
Right.
of looking at it as protecting our ally,
Yeah.
who else can we ally with in the Middle East?
Well, something that this article that you had sent about the Xi Jinping and Putin strengthening their ties, something that is said here, and it reminds me very much of what the scripture says. It says they will say peace, peace, and then sudden destruction. It says a trend has emerged towards redistribution of power in the world. The statement said, this new era will ensure peace, stability, and sustainable development. It added, rather than the power politics and bullying of U.S. supremacy where the weak fall prey to the strong. Most people, even here in the U.S., believe that America is the problem in the world. Now, I say most people, a lot of people believe, because I mean, you can talk to foreigners and people, you know, and even people that want to come to this country, they want to talk and discuss how bad America is, and America being the problem of the world. And just as you said, we are the ones who prop up a large portion of the world. So if they all believe that by America declining and there being this new power surge, because one of the things that was brought out, it says, with democracy backsliding globally, the resolve of Russia and China has been particularly strengthened by the perceived U.S. retreat from the global stage and the erosion of its own values at home. He said, this has created a void in the eyes of some in Beijing and Moscow, into which the two countries are only too happy to step. There's always that person who tries to step into a power vacuum.
Oh yeah, well, so there's so many things you could discuss here, but let's go back to Iraq. When we removed Saddam Hussein, we got rid of his government, and then we essentially pulled out. It left a power vacuum,
Yeah.
which is what gave rise to ISIS.
Mm-hmm.
So the only reason that those things didn't occur was because Saddam Hussein ruled with an iron fist. But the thing is, once we took him out, we destabilized the entire region.
Yeah.
You have to be careful when you create a power vacuum. Who's going to step in? And they're all but too happy to jump in globally. You know, I've talked about it over and over again, but creating subservience. Well, you know, we came in and we bailed you out in your time of need. Now you're indebted to us.
Yeah.
That's how they're going to approach the world.
Yeah.
We came to you in your time of need. It wasn't the U.S. It was us.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, like they create these alliances. That's why I think that we're playing a dangerous game. I mean, we have been for a long time.
Yeah.
There's a lot to take in. Do I think we could do things differently? Of course.
Yeah.
But like I said, it all comes down to we don't have a leader that the world takes seriously. I mean, and honestly, I've grown to a point where I genuinely feel sorry for him. I do believe that Biden is confused. He does not know, essentially, he doesn't comprehend exactly what's going on.
He's being
because
controlled.
if you look at him get off the planes or when he's at the White House, like they have to guide him.
Well, you know, they just made like special kind of sneakers for him that have extra grip, some kind of sticky grip on the bottom.
Yeah, because he's prone to falling.
And I think personally, you know, he just challenged Trump to 3 debates, I can't remember, which I found funny because yesterday Trump also accepted the vice presidential debate. Did you see that?
No.
Yeah. He said that he will take on the vice presidential debate until he picks a VP. But of course, you know, I mean, that being Trump fashion, he's trolling. But What I'm saying is, I think that the point of this is because it's twofold. Number one, it's far enough out that by the time the election comes around, they're banking on the American people forgetting his performance. It's going to be horrible. And then the second thing is they're setting the stage for his removal at the convention to put in somebody else to run, because they know that if they don't do something, I mean, when you look at how that Trump has spread the table, I mean, he's only like 2 points out of the state of Minnesota. Well, the last president, I mean, Reagan could have won Minnesota from Walter Mondale in the 80s, but he chose not to, which I wished he would have, because at that point he would have taken like all 50 states. But he chose not to, which I think was a bad thing. Anyway, he's only like 2 points from taking Minnesota. Okay, if he takes Minnesota, that only testifies to, he's going to win this thing. They know this. This is the whole point of this sham trial.
Oh yeah, well that's why they're literally throwing everything at the wall and just hoping something sticks.
Yeah,
they're running a giant smear campaign.
yeah,
and what they don't realize is the more they do that, the more fervent people that support Trump are going to become, because they just see it as an attack by the establishment.
Yeah. Well, and I that's why I say that this is a masquerade, because I think the whole mask thing was just a diversion. It was a distraction from what's really been going on. And
well, they're masters of distraction.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, let's not kid ourselves. Every time you have to look at the world with a healthy amount of skepticism, because anytime something happens, okay, well, what are they trying to divert your attention away from?
Yeah.
And they've, whether you accept it or not, it is there. There is a realm of people that control interest that extends far beyond what you can see.
Mm-hmm.
They're ultra rich and they're powerful, and they determine the course of policy and stuff like that. And that's why they're fighting so hard against Trump.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's absolutely abrasive, because he goes against a lot of.
Well, I think they know he's going to win.
Yeah.
Or they're scared of it. And I mean, you had to make the argument after those 4 years why we need to put in your guy, who we already know what you stand for. We already lived under the 8 years of Barack Obama. We've had these 4 years of low energy, low costs, great jobs, great employment. And you've got to make that argument. So all of a sudden this virus pops up. I lost a lot of friends, as many people did. They weren't friends. I wouldn't have lost them, but I lost a lot of people that I thought were somewhat my friends, when I just simply said, hey, this isn't everything we're being told. I'm not denying people are dying, but it's not.
Yeah, well, I called it from the very beginning. You asked my mom. I said, I think it's man-made.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I would not. Okay, if you look at, we talked about this previously. Look at the number of people killed under socialism and communism. Well over 140 million people in the last century died as a result of communism. Yeah. Well, they started having uprisings in China. China wanted to quell it. I'll say this, there's no way to prove it or disprove it. I think that they possibly allowed COVID to break loose, because then they forced everyone to quarantine. You weren't allowed out of your homes. A perfect way to stop a social uprising is to release a contagion.
Yeah.
And would they kill, however many millions of their own people? They've done it time and time again. It's not out of the realm of possibility.
Right.
And then it became a no-no to say, it originated in China. It most certainly did. There's no ifs, ands, buts.
I don't think many people are even denying that now, are they?
Well, but they used to get upset with,
Trump
saying that.
Get you kicked off Facebook.
It's a China virus,
Yeah.
It became, like everything else, highly politicized.
Right.
But I mean, what? if you think about the world as, okay, so coming from my background, to catch a criminal, you sometimes got to think like a criminal. Well, let's think like an evil dictator. You've got an uprising and you need to quell it. What better way than to, because look, we have labs that deal with dangerous diseases, viruses, contagions, um, many things that I think we shouldn't mess with.
Oh man,
But
yeah.
we have such strict protocols in order to ensure that those things do not escape.
Yeah.
So if you run a legitimate lab and you have the clean rooms and you have the decontamination, things like that should never escape.
We're
And
still dealing with human fallibility.
That's true, but like I said, I still, and I could be totally off the mark, but I wouldn't doubt if there was some level of planning to the release.
I'm not talking about COVID.
Yeah.
I was just meaning in general some of the some of the things that could be released that really would be
Absolutely devastating.
Yeah.
And the thing is, gain of function, like we're trying to create more and more potent diseases. And,
Yeah.
And ultimately, why?
Well, yeah, because I mean it's against the Geneva Convention of War, rules of war, that you cannot use what is it, biological warfare.
But the military still trains for biological, nuclear, chemical,
And as they should. As they should. Because I mean, you've got people like, I mean, you've got some of these terrorists that are not going to abide by those.
Oh no, and Iran now claiming that they have nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
And you have U.S. officials saying they probably do have enough enriched uranium to create a. And who helped them do that? The Russians.
The Russians, yep.
You know?
Well, along with the skids of money that the Obama administration was sending to them.
Only, what, 10 billion?
Yeah.
Is it more than that? I don't remember. It was billions.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. We need another strong president who's not afraid to go toe to toe with the world.
What we need, you're right. What we need is a return to God, a return to our faith, a return to a belief in Jesus Christ. I'm not just going to say God because that could be anything, but a return to Jesus Christ. Because I had a conversation this morning with someone, and it's over this thing that has hit the social media. I can't think of his name. Let me see if I can look it up real quick. But I mean, it was over the whole thing with Travis Kelce, who he apparently drank beer or whatever at his graduation, and Harris Butker, I guess is how you say his name. He also plays for the Kansas City Chiefs. In his graduation speech, he gives this speech that we need to move back to more of a traditional style. Like we talked last week about the trad wife, right? The traditional style home, where the wife stays at home, the husband goes out. And of course, as you can guess, I mean, I gave some historical, I cited some historical things where, like we talked again, that if a couple will get married, they'll have kids, they'll go buy a house, go invest in the community they live in. That actually pays off in dividends more so than going and getting a college degree does. And for one, the way our country's founded, we were founded based upon people who have a fear of God and are self-governed in that faith in God and in the Bible and in the covenant that the Pilgrims made. If we're living according to those rules and standards, what that entails is a man who is masculine enough to protect his family, but yet love his family. And a woman who is the nurturer and is willing to stay at home. Because of things like the Great Society that we saw come around in the 1960s, and even going all the way back to the 30s and 40s, After World War II, women decided they were going to stay in the workforce. I'm not saying I don't believe that a woman is to stay pregnant barefoot and in the kitchen. But what I'm saying is it created a lot of the problems we're seeing right now where things are just so overpriced. Why? Because you've got both men and women in the workforce. So what's happened is now you've got extra tax base. And again, I mean, I know this is, that was not accepted well. And I'm not saying that a woman shouldn't be allowed to go out and have a career, but we do have to, at some point, come to the realization that those kind of things were not helped to empower women.
Well, there's so many things that have been implemented that have diverged from the original purpose.
Yeah.
Like my grandmother welded ships in Oregon during World War II.
Yeah.
She was a ship welder, which ironically, I remember when I was a kid, my grandparents, their neighbor had a dock and they needed something welded. And my grandpa said, "Hold on, let me go get Doris." My tiny little grandma goes out there because she was Rosie the Riveter. I mean, she lived it. And she ironically went to college but ended up being a stay-at-home mom. The thing is, excuse me, we can go back in society before quote-unquote modern society. You had hunters and gatherers. The women stayed in the encampments. The men went out and hunted. That has been, if you look at biblical writings, the men went out, the women stayed at home. That was the norm for the majority of humanity.
Yeah.
We're trying to change the formula now and finding out it doesn't work. Society has prospered. There's 8 billion people in the world.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't get here by things being wrong.
Right.
We're now creating problems where problems didn't exist.
Well, let's just take a look at what normally happens when you get a couple that have a baby. By and large, it's never the man who says, "I want to stay home because my kid needs me." It is instinct for a man to go, "I need to go to work. I have a mouth to feed. I'm a provider. That's what I do. I'm an ATM. I'm a money vending machine, grocery dispenser." And it is always the woman who, when she's worked, the desire is for her to stay home, especially in the first several years of that kid's life. Why? Because that's the normal way things go.
Well, it gives you both a sense of purpose.
Yeah.
And you have a very guided purpose.
Yeah.
When you are especially when you're providing for someone who can't fend for themselves.
Yeah.
And it feels good to fit into that role. There's nothing more rewarding than children.
Yeah.
And knowing that you have done everything you can to prosper them.
Uh-huh.
And by pulling that away, by yanking that rug out and convincing people that, it's okay to be selfish.
Yeah.
We're undermining the exact thing that God created us to do.
Yeah. Well, I don't have kids myself, but at the same time, I did want them. And I view things now that I'm older in a little bit different way. I would have changed some views. If my 45-year-old self could go back to my 20-year-old self, I would have a completely different conversation. Now, again, I wanted to have children.
Well, it's not over yet, Thomas.
I don't have the money of Mick Jagger, so I don't know if I want to have kids at 45.
You'll never have enough money. If you base it on that.
It's not money. It's not money. It's just being 45, realizing that I would be in my 60s by the time that kid was 18.
Well, I have a friend who has a daughter who is essentially my oldest daughter's age, but he's a bit older than I am.
Yeah,
it's doable.
I've got a friend that I've known him for several years, and I just talked to him the other day on the phone, and he was he was in his early 40s when he and his wife got married. He had never been married, never even kissed a girl, okay, until he found the one that he knew he was going to be serious with. And he found this one, and they got married, and they've got two daughters, and one's 9 and the other 7. And I mean, the guy couldn't be happier than it. But kind of getting back on track, you're right. It's very rewarding. Men, you never hear men suffering with separation anxiety. It's always the woman. There's a reason for that. It is instinct. It is God put it in that woman to be the nurturer and to be there for those children. And I think the younger generation are seeing that. But we went through a long period of time, and our country has suffered the consequence. And all that the Great Society did, that LBJ gave to us, was it encouraged for derelict fathers to just take off and leave single mothers. And it created this sugar teat, if you will, of the government to keep people on it.
Once again, leading to that subservience I always talk about.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, what people don't realize is, okay, so a man and a woman have 2 children. When they die, they have simply created a stagnant population.
Yeah, they've not moved it. Yeah.
There's no growth. Well, when you only have 1 child, you have now created a decrease, because eventually you will go, and you only have 1. So the problem with not having children, or only having 1 or 2, eventually China's dealing with this, whether because they had their 1-child policy, then they bumped it up because they realized, we've created a problem. They now have a population decrease.
Well, Russia's dealing with it.
Yeah, well, the United States is too, because we're now at 1.26 children per couple.
Yeah.
We're going to create a situation where globally societies start to collapse because there's not enough people to replace the ones that are dying.
Well, again, it was the president of BlackRock who said that a declining population is good for a nation. And
so you have to go and look at their motives for that.
Yeah.
And that's not biblical.
Right.
God tells the Israelites, it says, your seed will be like the sands of the earth, innumerable. You can't do that by not having children.
Well, you're right. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, if you look at some of the like Solomon, or these other men, how many children they had. I mean, it's crazy.
Right.
And now, I have 3 children, and I can't imagine not having them.
Yeah.
One of the things I would tell people, if you're young and you're listening and you don't have children, you're married, and you're trying to decide for the right time, there will never be a right time.
Yeah.
You just have to decide to do it and have faith that God will see you through. Because you never have enough money. If you look at it monetarily, you will never have enough money to do anything.
Well, don't you remember years ago when the ideal family was the 1 boy and 1 girl? You remember that was always the painted picture of what a perfect family was. Yeah. And what people don't realize is exactly what you said. 2 children are just a stagnant. You're not increasing the population at all. No. And nothing wrong. If you only got one kid, or you got 2, God bless you. Because kids are just difficult. But what our point is here, when I mean difficult, let me back up. They're not.
They all know they can be.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm not taking away and trying to diminish a single or a 1-parent child or anything of that nature, or 1-child parent. How do I say that? Anyway, they've only got 1 kid or 2 kids. I'm not trying to diminish that in any shape, form, or fashion. But what I'm trying to say is that we have to be very smart. The scripture tells us to be wise as serpents, as harmless as doves. We have to be very smart when we start hearing those so-called overlords telling us what the ideal family is. And going back to what we, mask or masquerade, all of this stuff is a distraction. And now we see that BlackRock and JP Morgan have moved into Ukraine. Guess what? The American idea that the world hates is not the American idea. It is the idea of leftist progressivism. It's really the Fabian socialism that Europe has suffered under for decades. That they hate. Not what the shining city on a hill.
It's the outright greed.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with, things like this. Do I believe that the Ukrainian people deserve sovereignty? Yes. Do I think that American corporations need to move in order for that to happen? No.
Not at all.
Exactly. I think a large part of the world sees the greed that extends from certain entities, and that's what they equate with the U.S. I don't agree with that either. I don't want to see those institutions move in. I don't like the idea of. Go back and look. I would posit anyone who's listening to this, go and do your research and see how many institutions, how many companies, how much of the S&P 500, how much of Wall Street is owned by just 3 corporations.
Yeah.
It's scary.
Yeah.
It's scary. And you have untold amounts of money that are floating around. And if you want to find out who controls public policy, you look no further. I mean, it's the age-old adage: follow the money.
Well, prior to the Great Depression, there were 23, I believe, rubber manufacturing plants that made tires for vehicles. After the Great Depression, that number shrunk to 4 or 5. And those all became corporations. Just like that, the pandemic was just another exchange of wealth. The rich got richer. And when I say the rich, I'm not talking about the Donald Trumps and the Elon Musks. I'm talking about the JP Morgans and the BlackRocks. They got richer. You had the transfer of wealth. And
look at how much money Pfizer and Moderna and all these other companies made on something that's completely ineffective.
Right.
When you look at it now, I will say that I think the technology is interesting. Do I think it could be abused? Yes. Do I think advancements were made? Most likely, yes. Was it done all for the right reason? No.
Well, I've talked to people that were in Iraq and also in Afghanistan. And one of the things that I've heard a few of them say is that, we weren't even fighting. We were taking money to these generals that had armies, that had just paying them to disband their army or to use their army to fight against, the insurgents. Where do you think we were getting that money to pay those guys? War's a money-making industry. I mean, we had no business. Why are we doing that?
We've turned it into a business.
Yeah,
is what's happened.
Yeah.
I mean, offloading pallets of money to give to people, and inevitably, a lot of that money falls into the wrong hands, or we train the very people that turn on us.
Yeah.
The mujahideen. There's, God, we could probably take a couple hours. I could go through all of the different, peoples around the world that we funded, trained, and then turned around to bite us. Later on.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. I mean, it just makes you wonder what's going to happen with Ukraine. It's another war we're fighting by proxy.
Well, and so the thing is, so Macron, I think we had talked about this previously, but Macron had said that France would send troops into Ukraine, would actually put boots on the ground if 2 conditions were met. 1, Russia breaks through Ukraine's lines.
Yeah.
And 2, Ukraine requests their assistance. Which, inevitably, if the Russians do break through, they will ask for help. And France, ironically, the French are always known as the great capitulators. The old joke used to be, French rifles never fired, only dropped once. But France is really, I'm not really sure why. Maybe historically because they realized look at what happened with them in Germany. Of course, it only took 2 weeks for for Germany to take over.
Well, and he only marched like 1,200 soldiers across the bridge.
Yeah,
and he took them out by night and marched them back again the next day.
And the thing is, the French government was full of fascists.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I actually there's a soldier that a retired soldier that I work with right now, and we were talking about that. He said, "Look," he said, "don't let the French government fool you as to how tough and determined the French soldier actually is." He said, "The French soldier's hands are tied, and it's the same thing we're doing in our country. An American soldier's hand is tied as to what they can do." Because we're spending bukus of money making people rich.
Oh yeah, well, really restrictive rules of engagement. Some of the rules of engagement when I was in the Guard that we were taught was ludicrous. When you look at trying to win a war, it's highly ineffective.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. We are, like I said, if that is the case, if Russia does break through, if France sends troops, the UK has already said that they would assist, so is Germany. It will be a world war. There's no ifs, ands, buts about it.
Yeah.
Because who's going to aid
Right.
Russia is going to be China.
It's going to be China.
And then the Middle East will break out.
Yeah.
Because inevitably, when the world, it always does. Like in World War One, there was fighting in North Africa and the Middle East. World War II, there was fighting in Africa and the Middle East. World War III will inevitably.
They're all world wars are meant to reset, basically, governments. They're there to reset their shifts of power. What they are.
Yeah, and the only difference I would posit with a world war now is we have many more players with nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
When World War II happened, we were working on the atomic bomb, and Oppenheimer and then created the first atomic bombs, which we dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But now, India, Pakistan, potentially Iran, Israel, Russia, China, the United States, blah, blah, blah. Everybody's got nukes.
Yeah.
And once somebody, and Russia has threatened time and time again to use tactical nukes in Ukraine. And I'm not 100% convinced that they wouldn't try it.
No,
but once you open that box.
No, there's no putting that back in the.
No, and the problem is once that happens. So I can equate this as working for a police officer for the better part of a decade. When you meet force, you always go one level above the force that's being used. You can go one. They used to call it the force continuum. Okay. But that's how warfare should be conducted.
Right.
So if they use a tactical nuke, what is the only thing that? Nuclear weapons are the only alternative we have.
Yeah.
Even if it's equal force, I don't know. I just think that it's a dangerous time, and we need someone who. I guess, for a lack of a better term, inspires fear in our enemies.
Well, it's always good to have that perceived madman at the helm. That guy that everybody goes, if you've got that guy living down the street, that everybody's like, hey, he would rather kill you than to look at you. Nobody messes with that guy. I knew this this situation when I lived in Alabama where we had this guy that was this martial arts instructor, and he even worked with the local police department there with, teaching them certain things. And this dude just all of a sudden went crazy. And even the police had to go and arrest him one time, but they approached him very, very cautiously. And I say that because, when you've got that guy, nobody messes with him. And yeah, we do need that person who inspires. Do not do anything to upset the United States, or they will deal with you quickly. And again, if you want that kind of respect in the world, it all comes back to a faith in God. It all comes back to returning to a faith in Christ. Because once that happens as a nation, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that each man is created equal with certain inalienable rights. We look at our rights and everyone else's rights as being instilled in them by their Creator. Therefore, it is not ours to take.
No, which we've talked about innumerable times, but that's why the Constitution was written as it was. It wasn't to outline your rights, so to speak. It was to outline the limitations of the government, which is why it is of paramount importance that you don't allow the government to infringe on those rights.
Yeah.
The Constitution is meant to restrict the power of the government, not the power of the people.
Yeah.
We've gotten it backwards as a society, and we looked at the government to fix everything. All the government does is muddle things up. I much rather subscribe to, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Don't be dependent on anyone.
They're even trying to say that's white privilege, that term.
Oh, good grief.
Yeah.
The world, in many ways, look, no one knows when the end of the world will come.
Right.
Okay. But I've said this before, and I'll say it again. We're one day closer. We are in the inevitable march towards the end.
Yeah.
But as the Bible says, in the end times, right will be wrong and wrong will be
That's
right.
That's right.
And we're seeing it. There's a multitude of things that are demonstrations of that, where we glorify the murder of babies.
Yeah.
And it's a mother's choice, and it's her body. It's not her body. That's a separate human being. And I think some of the sickest ideas have sprang forth from that, which is it's no different than, as the Bible says, there's nothing new under the sun. It's no different than the days where they sacrificed their children to Baal or Moloch. But the having a fully formed human being and dismembering them. Yeah. That's grotesque.
It's very disturbing.
And the fact that people, I was watching, not to plug them, but I was watching Pluto because I like to watch cops. Relive the glory days, shall we say. But, an advertisement came on for Planned Parenthood. And it was women, the women going, I love telling my abortion story. Yeah. And the first time I had an abortion, blah, blah, blah. It made me literally ill. Yeah. Made me feel sick to my stomach that's what we're glorifying.
Right.
Like that, how horrific. How could you be proud of destroying a human life?
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially in that fashion. Someone who is so pure and innocent. It baffles me.
Well, it has been a good exchange, and I think we're going to leave it off with that this week. And we will not be here next week. Excuse me.
I was going to say, hate to end it on a sour note.
No. That's not a sour note. That's not a sour note. That's very true, and that's why that I'm. It's not a sour note. It is very sad. The state of our country. Where we are right now. But there's hope. There's always hope, and that's what the exchange is about. Is trying to bring hope and talk about that hope, and that is through Christ Jesus. There is no other way. Jesus said He was the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father. There is no other way to get to the Father. There is no other way to have peace other than to know the Prince of Peace. And quote a little Dave Ramsey there. I didn't mean to. But he is the only way. And um, the we've got to return back to our founding, and that is on the principles of the Bible. And anyway, what are your last comments here, Michael?
Well, so something I would like everyone to do is really evaluate the state of the world, the state of the country, and like you said, return to those founding principles. That's what made us so successful. And the further we move from that, the less successful we'll be. The more prone to divisiveness, to hatred, to lacking the value of human life. We march closer and closer as we move away from God. Look at your life and evaluate where you can make those changes to become more biblical and change your family, your community, and just grow from there.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's no boundary that we couldn't surpass if we all took a stand and said enough is enough. This is not going to happen.
Yeah.
And put our foot down. But the more you capitulate and the more you allow that to take over, the harder society will become.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, thank you for joining us again this week, and have a blessed week. And we won't see you here next week, but have a great Memorial Day weekend. And remember that all of this is only possible because of Christ.